Wow, you really weren't kidding about this whole deep dive thing.
Oh, yeah.
We've got a quite a stack of material here on spirituality and the brain.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lectures from that neuroscientist you mentioned,
Uh-huh.
personal stories from that spiritual experience survey we talked about,
Right.
even some evolutionary biology thrown in there for good measure.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Buckle up, listeners.
It's going to be a wild ride.
It really is.
It's not just about kind of listing what people experience, though.
Right.
The challenge is understanding why we're wired for this stuff at all, how these experiences actually work in the brain.
Right, because from like a purely evolutionary standpoint,
Yeah.
wouldn't a spiritual brain be kind of a waste of energy? Shouldn't we just be focused on like survival, finding food and all that?
Right.
Where does the spiritual stuff fit in?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
From a scientific perspective, we have to reconcile this drive for survival that we have, this biological drive,
Right.
with this capacity for spiritual experience,
That's right.
which you could call extra.
Yeah.
Philosophers and theologians have been kind of wrestling with this for centuries. But neuroscience is offering some pretty fascinating new insights.
Oh, speaking of clashing viewpoints,
Have
you included that Richard Dawkins quote.
Oh, right.
The one where he calls faith very, very dangerous.
Yeah. Strong words.
Those are strong words for an evolutionary biologist.
It is provocative.
Yeah.
It raises the question of whether faith is ultimately beneficial or harmful.
Right.
And I think, like a lot of things, it's probably both.
Sure.
We're going to be looking at studies that show potential benefits for mental and physical health.
Right.
But also, we're going to explore some of the potential downsides.
Right.
Like when belief systems become rigid or lead to harmful choices.
Okay, so that brings us to, I think, the first big hurdle.
Yeah.
What do we even mean by spiritual and religious?
Right.
It seems like everybody's got their own definition, right?
Absolutely. And that makes scientific study really tricky. I remember one of my first college classes, we all had to write our definitions of spiritual on the board.
Okay.
It was total chaos.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So how do researchers even begin to study something that's so slippery?
Well, they have to use what are called operational definitions.
Okay.
Basically, you're creating very precise, measurable definitions that fit this specific study.
Got it.
So everybody's on the same page.
So it's a little different from how philosophers tackled it, like Schleiermacher and Otto.
Exactly.
They were more focused on the feeling of the spiritual, like a sense of absolute dependence for Schleiermacher, and what Otto called the numinous.
Yeah, the experience of awe and mystery.
Right. Okay, so scientists are getting more nitty-gritty
Yes.
to actually measure something.
Yes.
So that means we're going to have to get into the brain itself, right?
Precisely.
Time for some anatomy 101.
Exactly. Imagine you're building a brain from scratch, like Dr. Frankenstein,
Yeah.
but with the goal of making it capable of spiritual experience. What would you need to include?
Well, first off, you need some kind of navigation system, right?
Yes.
A way to figure out where we are in the world.
That's where the orientation area comes in.
Orientation area.
Yeah, it processes all that sensory information.
Okay.
Helps us figure out our location in space and time.
But isn't it weird that in some spiritual practices, people report feeling like a complete loss of space and time?
Right.
Like their GPS is going haywire.
Yeah, that's one of the things researchers are trying to figure out.
Okay.
Does this altered activity in the orientation area create that sense of boundlessness, of being outside normal reality?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating question.
Totally. Okay, so I've got navigation.
Yeah.
What else would we add to this Frankenstein brain?
Let's see. I think I would add something to deal with numbers.
Okay.
Humans seem to be kind of obsessed with quantifying things.
That's true.
So-
I love our numbers.
You're hitting on the brain's quantitative function there.
Quantitative function.
Yeah, it's crucial for pretty much all of math and counting. But here's where it gets interesting.
All right.
Think about how many religious and spiritual traditions are full of numbers.
Oh, that's true.
40 days and 40 nights, 7 deadly sins, the eightfold path in Buddhism.
Wow. Yeah, you're right.
It makes you wonder if there's some deeper connection there between our need to quantify the world and our attempts to understand the spiritual realm.
That's interesting. I like that.
Yeah.
What about you listeners out there?
Yeah.
What significant numbers stand out in your spiritual background? Something to think about. Okay, so we got navigation, we've got numbers.
Yeah.
To make this Frankenstein brain really complex,
Yes.
we got to account for how it processes information on all these different levels, right?
Exactly.
You've got the reductionist side, breaking things down into parts, analyzing the details.
Right.
But then you've also got that holistic side, right? Seeing the interconnectedness of everything.
The big picture.
The big picture.
Exactly. And it's that interplay between the two that's particularly interesting in the context of spiritual experience.
Okay.
So could those mystical experiences of oneness, that unity with something larger than ourselves, could that be a result of these two processing styles working together?
It's like those optical illusions where you see one image, then you see another one, depending on how you look at it.
Yes.
Maybe our brains can switch between these different modes of perception.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it speaks to the incredible plasticity and complexity of the human brain.
Absolutely. I can't forget the emotional side of things.
Oh, no. Of course.
I mean, spirituality is all about powerful feelings, right?
Absolutely. And that's where the limbic system comes in.
Limbic system.
This is our emotional control center.
Okay.
It influences everything from how we experience joy and love to how we cope with fear and grief.
Right.
It plays a huge role in how we connect with this sacred.
How rituals make us feel.
Right.
Even how we understand those grand narratives of our various faiths.
So we've built this spiritual brain, but here's the real head scratcher.
What's that?
How do you study something as elusive as spirituality?
Yeah.
It's not like you can stick someone in an MRI and see their beliefs light up, right?
You've hit on one of the biggest challenges in the field.
Well, hell,
trying to measure the immeasurables.
Okay.
So scientists have to get creative, use both what we call subjective and objective measures to kind of get a glimpse into the spiritual mind.
So subjective being things like those rate your spirituality questionnaires.
Exactly.
I remember reading about this neuroscientist who was interviewing a nun.
Okay.
And asked her to rank her spirituality on a scale of 1 to 10.
Oh, my God.
And he realized immediately how ridiculous that sounded.
Yeah, a little awkward.
A little bit.
Yeah, but objective measures like brain scans and physiological data can give us some clues.
You can see real-time changes in brain activity during prayer or meditation.
Right.
Things like that.
So it's like we're piecing together this puzzle, but we're missing some pieces.
Right.
They're out there somewhere.
Yeah, and there are some cutting-edge ideas emerging that might help us get a clearer picture.
Oh, really? What are those?
Well, one intriguing approach is using external measures of spirituality.
Okay.
For example, you could track a student's progress in a spiritual practice alongside their teacher's assessment.
Oh, interesting.
And that raises the question of which perspective is more accurate.
Ooh, that's like a spiritual peer review.
It is.
I love it.
Right. So, whose judgment is right?
That's a whole other philosophical debate.
It's a whole other can of worms.
Totally. Okay, so that's one idea.
Yeah, another concept is what we call the subtraction technique.
Okay.
Could we isolate the spiritual by factoring out everything else we can measure, like cognitive function, emotional responses?
So subtract everything else, and what's left is the spiritual.
That's the idea.
That's really interesting.
Right.
I like that a lot. Okay, and then the other mind-blowing possibility.
What if a profound spiritual experience showed absolutely no changes in the brain scan?
Ooh.
What would that tell us?
That would be fascinating.
It would.
Okay, let's get down to brass tacks.
Okay.
Do the brains of believers and non-believers actually work differently?
Right.
Or are we all just kind of wired the same under the hood?
Well, that's a question that has sparked a ton of research.
I bet.
But, before we jump in, we need to remember that non-believers isn't this simple category.
Right.
There's a whole spectrum of viewpoints within that group.
Okay, good point. So what have we found? Any big differences popping up in these studies?
There are definitely some intriguing findings.
Okay.
One study showed that long-term meditators and people who pray regularly tend to have physically thicker brains.
Wait, thicker brains?
Yeah, thicker brains.
What does that even mean?
Well, specifically in certain areas compared to those who don't engage in these practices.
So certain parts of their brain are literally bigger.
Thicker.
That's so wild.
It is interesting.
But is it a chicken or egg situation?
Right.
Did they start with thicker brains, or did the practices cause the changes?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Researchers are still trying to tease that apart.
Okay.
It's likely a combination of both nature and nurture.
Right.
Our genes predispose us to certain traits, but our experiences and behaviors
Yeah.
can also shape our brains over time.
Right, which highlights how dynamic the brain is.
Exactly.
It's always changing, always adapting based on what we do and think.
Exactly. It's not a static organ.
It's alive.
It is.
All right, so thicker brains, what else?
Well, there was another study on the thalamus.
Okay, the thalamus.
Yeah, a key sensory processing hub in the brain.
Got it.
And they found asymmetry in this area in long-term meditators.
Okay.
One side was more active than the other.
So their brains are processing the world differently.
It seems so.
That's wild. How might that change someone's experience in everyday life?
It's a puzzle we're still piecing together.
Yeah.
But it does suggest that these practices are shaping the way the brain perceives and interacts with reality.
Huh.
Right down to how it filters sensory input.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
They did a study where they scanned the brains of atheists while they were contemplating God.
Yes. I mean, talk about an awkward experiment.
I can't even imagine.
But it was a bold idea
Uh-huh.
to try to understand how a brain that doesn't believe in God processes the concept of God.
Right. So what happened? Did their brains just short circuit?
Well, their frontal lobes,
Okay.
which are involved in focus and higher level thinking,
Got it.
didn't light up like they did in the nuns who were praying.
Oh, interesting.
Instead, one side showed a slight increase while the other actually decreased in activity.
Almost like their brains were wrestling with the idea.
Yeah.
But a cognitive dissonance. Like this doesn't compute.
Right. It seems there's a real difference in how the brain engages with these concepts, depending on pre-existing beliefs.
It's like, how open are we to new ideas?
Yeah.
Especially ones that challenge our existing views.
It's a big question.
It is.
To what extent do our beliefs shape our perception of reality itself? That's something for everybody to think about,
It is.
whether you're religious or not.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, then there's the whole dopamine connection.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, wasn't there a study where giving non-believers dopamine actually made them perceive the world more like believers?
There was.
Right.
They used ambiguous images.
Okay.
The kind where you might see something that isn't really there.
Right.
And those given dopamine were more likely to perceive those hidden images.
Yeah.
Just like the believers.
So dopamine, the brain chemical we usually associate with pleasure and reward, could actually be playing a role in how we form beliefs.
It's a compelling possibility.
Okay. And then there's that whole God gene thing. That's a little controversial.
It is definitely controversial.
Yeah.
It links a specific gene to self-transcendence.
Okay.
Which is a key element of many spiritual experiences.
A God gene, though. I mean, come on.
I know it ruffles some feathers.
Yeah.
But it brings up these fascinating questions about whether our capacity for spirituality is partly hardwired into our DNA.
Okay, so we've got brain structure, dopamine, genetics.
It's a lot to think about.
I know, my mind is blown.
Yeah.
Where do we even go from here?
Well, now we're going to take a journey through the lifespan.
Okay.
We're going to explore how spiritual beliefs develop and evolve from infancy to old age.
Yeah.
And how those changes are reflected in the brain.
Right.
Buckle up for round 2.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, so let's start with stage 0.
Okay, stage 0.
Infancy.
Infancy.
We're talking about the very foundation of spirituality.
Okay.
Even though there's no conscious understanding yet.
Right.
It's fascinating because it highlights the power of environment, shaping those core feelings of trust and connection that can influence a person's entire spiritual journey.
It's like planting those spiritual seeds, but they need the right conditions to actually grow.
Exactly. Think of it this way. A baby's brain is forming millions of connections, but they're not organized yet.
Okay.
It's like this vast, untamed forest of neural pathways.
Got it.
There's no real cognitive framework for faith at this point.
Right.
But the groundwork is being laid through those early relationships and experiences.
Okay, so we're setting the stage.
Yeah.
Then we move on to stage 1.
Stage 1.
The intuitive projective stage.
Right.
This is where things get a little more,
Yeah.
imaginative, shall we say.
Ah, yes, the magical thinking of childhood.
Yes.
This is where language and symbols come into play.
Right.
But their understanding of the world is still incredibly fluid.
Sure.
This is where those adorable stories from your survey come in.
Oh, yes.
The kid who thought they could send prayers to God via balloon.
Via balloon? Yes, and the one who thought God had a coloring book.
Exactly.
And was just slacking off on finishing the animals.
It's pure wonder and unfiltered imagination.
Yeah. So what's happening in the brain at this stage? Is it just a chaotic mess of neural fireworks?
Actually, it's quite the opposite.
Really?
The brain is incredibly active during this stage.
Okay.
In fact, it's at its peak metabolic rate,
Wow.
forming an overabundance of connections.
Hmm.
It's like the brain is saying, let's try everything and see what sticks.
No wonder kids can believe almost anything at this age.
Exactly.
Their brains are wired for possibility.
They haven't developed the critical thinking skills yet to filter out the more fantastical ideas.
Sure. And this is where those early influences really start to take root.
Right.
The stories, the myths, the rituals.
Exactly.
Okay, so that brings us to stage 2.
Stage 2.
The mythic literal stage.
Yes.
Kids are starting to internalize those stories and beliefs.
Right.
Make them their own.
They're weaving those narratives into their understanding of the world, but they're still interpreting them very literally.
Okay.
Those stories have a concrete, almost tangible reality for them at this stage.
But then something interesting happens.
What's that?
The brain starts to do some serious editing.
You got to remember that overabundance of connections from stage 1?
Yes.
Well, the brain starts to prune them back.
It's cutting things out.
Strengthening the connections that align with the dominant narratives and weakening those that don't.
So it's like the brain is creating a custom-tailored belief system.
Right.
Based on the cultural input that it's receiving.
Exactly.
Wow. So could this be why it's so hard to shake those early ingrained beliefs later in life?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's something researchers are still exploring.
Okay.
It does seem that the beliefs we form in these early stages can have a really lasting impact.
Yeah.
Even as we mature and develop more critical thinking skills.
Okay, so moving into adolescence, we hit stage 3.
Stage 3.
Synthetic conventional stage.
Yeah.
This is where those beliefs start to solidify.
Absolutely. Teenagers are trying to figure out who they are. And their belief systems become a central part of their identity.
It's like classic teenage angst.
Right.
I believe this, and you can't tell me otherwise.
Exactly. They're integrating those early stories and myths into a more coherent worldview.
Right.
Trying to make sense of their place in the world.
And this coincides with another major shift in brain development.
It does remember how the brain was at its peak metabolic rate during childhood.
Yes.
Well, during adolescence, that rate starts to decline dramatically.
So all those foundational beliefs that were formed during those high metabolism years, they're basically getting locked in as the brain settles down.
It's a fascinating idea.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how much of our adult worldview is shaped by our teenage brains.
Right. It's not that our beliefs can't change after adolescence.
Sure.
But those teenage years definitely seem to be a period of significant influence, shaping our long-term outlook on the world.
All right, there comes stage 4.
Stage 4.
The individuative reflective stage.
Yes.
This is where things get a little rebellious.
You bet. This is the classic young adult stage of questioning authority.
Right.
Pushing back against those established beliefs.
Yeah.
Forging their own path.
To be young and free thinking again.
I don't know.
But ironically, this is also a time when the brain is at peak function, right?
That's right. The brain is at its most stable and efficient during this stage.
Yeah.
It's hit its stride after all that pruning and rewiring.
So it's like you have this perfect storm.
Yeah.
You have a brain capable of complex, abstract thought. And this drive to challenge the status quo.
Right.
No wonder this is when people have those major shifts in their belief systems.
Exactly. It's a time of immense potential for growth and transformation.
Totally. Okay, onward to stage 5.
Stage 5.
Conjunctive faith.
Yes.
Now we're entering middle age. When people often start to reassess their lives and beliefs.
There's often a sense of disillusionment.
Yeah.
A realization that life is more complex.
Right.
Than the neat and tidy beliefs they might have held in their younger years.
It's like those earlier frameworks start to break down a little bit.
Exactly. And this stage coincides with another shift in brain development.
Oh, does it?
A gradual decline in metabolic activity that begins around age 40.
So as people are grappling with these existential questions, their brains are also starting to slow down.
It's an interesting parallel.
Yeah. Is that a coincidence, or is there something more going on?
It could be that this metabolic decline actually contributes to that sense of introspection.
Okay.
And the search for deeper meaning.
Okay, so stage 6.
Stage 6.
Universalizing faith.
Right.
You said this one is pretty rare.
Yes. Very few people reach this stage.
Okay.
It's characterized by a profound sense of unity with all beings. A transcendence of self-interest.
So think Mother Teresa, Gandhi.
Exactly. People who seem to embody pure compassion and love.
Yes, and this stage might be reflected in changes happening in the brain.
It's possible, One area that shows decreased activity during meditation and mystical experiences
Okay.
is the parietal lobe,
Okay.
which is involved in our sense of self.
Right. So could it be that these individuals who have such a diminished sense of self are reflecting a neurological pattern that's more common in later life?
It's a thought-provoking possibility.
It is.
As the brain naturally declines with age,
Right.
perhaps it creates the conditions for this kind of expansive, self-transcending experience.
Wow.
It challenges our assumptions about what it means to age gracefully.
It really does. Okay, so we've journeyed from infancy to old age,
We have.
following those twists and turns of spiritual development.
It's quite a journey.
It is. It's incredible how closely it mirrors the changes happening in the brain.
It really does highlight how interconnected our physical and spiritual selves are.
Right.
Our beliefs aren't just abstract ideas floating in the ether.
Yeah.
They're deeply rooted in the biology of our brains.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit. We've talked about beliefs, but what about the actions that go along with them?
Yes.
The rituals that so many traditions are built upon.
Rituals are more than just symbolic gestures.
Okay.
They're powerful tools for engaging the whole body and mind, deepening our connection to our beliefs and to each other.
One of the stories from your survey really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah.
This woman described having a life-altering experience during a ritual that wasn't even part of her own tradition.
Wow.
She felt so connected to something bigger than herself, even though she didn't fully understand the ritual's meaning.
That's a powerful example of how rituals can transcend cultural boundaries and tap into something universal within us.
Right. So how do they work? What's happening in the brain and body during a ritual?
Well, think about how our brains are wired for action.
Okay.
We learn best when we combine thought with movement.
It's like learning to play an instrument. You can read all the theory books you want,
Right.
but you won't truly master it until you get your hands on the instrument and start playing.
Exactly. Rituals provide that embodied experience for our beliefs. They connect thought to action, engaging the whole person, not just the mind.
Okay. And a lot of rituals involve rhythmic movement,
Yeah.
like chanting, singing, dancing.
Right.
Could that be part of their power?
Absolutely. Rhythm has a profound effect on the brain and body.
Okay.
It synchronizes our internal rhythms, creates a sense of unity and flow.
Like how fast music pumps us up,
Yes.
while slower music calms us down?
Precisely. And that rhythmic synchronization can extend beyond the individual to the group.
Okay.
When people engage in rituals together, their bodies and brains literally start to align,
Wow.
creating a powerful sense of connection and shared experience.
It's like everyone's individual rhythm merging into a collective heartbeat.
It is.
No wonder those massive religious gatherings can feel so powerful.
It's a prime example
Yeah.
of how rituals can connect us to something larger than ourselves.
Right.
Whether it's a community, a tradition, or even a sense of the divine.
Okay, let's zoom in on two specific practices that are at the heart of many traditions.
Okay.
Meditation and prayer.
Yeah.
These seem so different on the surface.
They do.
But what can neuroscience tell us about how they work?
Well, both have incredibly long histories
Right.
and take many forms.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, they're both about intentionally directing attention
Okay.
and cultivating specific states of mind.
Got it.
What's fascinating is that research is showing that these practices have measurable effects on our biology
Okay.
that go way beyond just feeling good.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What kind of effects are we talking about?
We're seeing changes in brain activity, heart rate, hormone levels, even immune function.
Wow.
It's like these practices are workout for the whole system,
Right.
training both body and mind.
So what's actually going on in the brain when people meditate or pray? Are there similarities in brain activity,
There are.
even though the practices themselves are so different?
Studies have shown that both centering prayer and Tibetan Buddhist visualization meditation,
Okay, two very different practices.
two very different practices, show similar patterns of brain activity.
Wow, okay.
Increased frontal lobe activity, which is associated with focus and concentration.
Okay.
Decreased parietal lobe activity, which is linked to a sense of self and spatial awareness.
Okay.
And increased thalamus activity, which suggests heightened overall brain engagement.
So it's not just about calming down. It's
Right.
about shifting into a different mode of being,
Exactly.
changing how the entire brain is functioning.
But while there were similarities, there are also fascinating differences.
Okay.
The Buddhists in this study who were focusing on a visual image showed more activity in the visual cortex.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the nuns who were reciting a verbal prayer showed more activity in language areas.
So it's like the brain is adapting to the specific demands of the practice.
Exactly.
It's showing its flexibility.
This is a remarkable organ.
It is. It really is. Okay, and this isn't just some fleeting effect.
No.
Another study found that experienced meditators, when shown images designed to trigger emotional responses, showed greater emotional stability than beginners.
Right.
Even without consciously trying to control their emotions.
It was like their brains had learned to regulate emotions more effectively through years of practice.
So meditation is like emotional weightlifting.
Right. And there's early research suggesting that long-term meditation might even lead to changes in neurotransmitter systems.
Interesting.
Specifically serotonin and dopamine.
Okay.
Which are crucial for mood regulation and our experience of reward.
So these practices could have a lasting impact on how our brains function.
It seems so.
Not just during meditation, but in everyday life. It's like changing the hardware of our minds.
That's what the research is pointing to.
Wow.
And it has huge implications for understanding the mind-body connection.
Speaking of the mind-body connection,
Yes.
we have to talk about the link between religion and health more broadly.
Okay.
You remember that headline about Christians being less likely to die before Christmas?
Oh, right.
That's just one example of a growing body of research in this area.
It's a fascinating area of study,
Yeah.
but a complex one.
Sure.
As we always say, correlation doesn't equal causation.
Of course.
We need to be cautious about overinterpreting the findings.
Right.
But the research is definitely worth exploring.
Okay, so one of the first challenges is figuring out how to measure religiousness in a meaningful way.
Right. It's not like we can just take someone's spiritual temperature.
Right. Exactly.
Some studies use simple measures like church attendance,
Okay.
which gives a general sense of religious involvement, but it's not a perfect measure.
Sure.
Others use self-reported scales
Yeah.
that ask about beliefs and practices,
Right.
which can be more detailed, but rely on people's own interpretation.
Right.
Each approach has its limitations, but they provide valuable data points.
So what have we learned from these data points? Any surprises?
There are some intriguing findings.
Okay.
Studies have shown a positive correlation between church attendance and lower risk of heart disease,
Okay.
lung disease,
Wow.
even suicide.
Those are some pretty significant health outcomes.
They are.
So how do we explain this connection?
Right.
Is it just about healthier lifestyles, or is there something more going on?
There are likely both indirect and direct mechanisms at play.
Okay.
Indirectly, religion often promotes healthier behaviors.
Okay.
Many religions discourage things like smoking, excessive drinking, risky sexual behavior,
Right.
all of which can harm health.
It's like having a built-in support system for making healthy choices.
Exactly. And then there are the direct mechanisms.
Okay.
The religious practices themselves can alter the brain and body in ways that promote health.
Okay.
We've already talked about meditation.
Right.
But other practices like communal singing or prayer can reduce stress hormones, boost the immune system,
Right.
promote a sense of well-being.
It's like those practices are giving us a biological tune-up.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's like fine-tuning your system for optimal performance.
I like that. Okay. But we have to be honest about the potential downsides too.
Of course.
Right. There are cases where religious beliefs can lead to harmful health choices.
Absolutely. We can't ignore that.
Right.
Sometimes beliefs can conflict with medical advice,
Right.
leading people to refuse potentially life-saving treatments.
Right.
It's a reminder that critical thinking is always important,
Yeah.
even within a faith context.
Absolutely. Or there's the issue of scrupulosity.
Right.
Where religious guilt and anxiety can be incredibly debilitating.
When those beliefs take on a life of their own
Right.
and start causing more harm than good.
It's all about balance.
It is.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, one of the things that surprised me in your survey
Yeah.
was that even many non-religious people want their doctors to ask about their spiritual beliefs.
Yeah. What do you make of that?
I don't know, it's interesting.
I think it speaks to the importance of the human element in healthcare.
Uh-huh.
People want to be seen as whole individuals,
Right.
not just a collection of symptoms.
Sure.
That spiritual dimension, even if it's not explicitly religious,
Right.
is a part of who they are.
Yeah.
And it can influence how they cope with illness
Yeah.
and make decisions about their treatment.
It's like acknowledging that there's more to us than just our physical bodies.
Exactly.
Our beliefs, our values, our sense of meaning.
It all plays a role
Yeah.
in our overall well-being.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground on the physical health front.
We have.
But what about the relationship between religion and mental health?
Oh, that's a whole other can of worms.
I know.
And as we saw with Monica's story,
Yeah.
religion can be both a source of support and a source of struggle when it comes to mental health.
Right. Her experience really showed how those two sides can coexist,
They can.
sometimes even within the same person.
Exactly.
Mm.
So let's unpack this complex relationship a bit further.
Okay.
Let's start by looking at the potential benefits.
Okay.
Religion can provide a sense of community, purpose,
Right.
and meaning,
Right.
all of which are crucial for mental well-being.
Especially in times of crisis or hardship,
Exactly.
those beliefs can be so grounding.
Yeah, they give you something to hold on to.
For sure. And there's evidence that religious involvement can reduce anxiety
Yes.
and improve impulse control,
Uh-huh.
which are key factors in many mental health conditions. It's like having this built-in coping mechanism
Right.
for dealing with life's challenges.
It gives people a framework for understanding suffering,
Yeah.
a set of practices for finding peace,
Right.
and often a supportive community to lean on.
Sure. But we can't just focus on the positive side.
No, we can't.
Right. We have to acknowledge the downsides, too.
Of course,
As we discussed earlier, scrupulosity can be incredibly debilitating,
it can.
leading to excessive guilt and self-blame.
And sadly, there are cases where religion is used to justify harmful actions,
Yeah.
even against oneself.
That's the dark side of things.
It's a reminder that religion, like any powerful force,
Sure.
can be misused and distorted.
Absolutely. Okay, this brings us to a really fascinating intersection.
Yeah.
The relationship between mental health and mystical experiences.
Okay.
I'm thinking about historical figures
Uh-huh.
whose visions and profound experiences,
Yeah.
if they were alive today,
Right.
might be interpreted as symptoms of mental illness.
It's a tricky area.
It is.
Throughout history, there have been figures whose visions and intense spiritual experiences
Right.
might be seen through a very different lens today.
Like Joan of Arc hearing voices, or
Oh.
St. Teresa having seizures.
Yeah, if they lived today, would they be diagnosed with a mental disorder?
It's impossible to say for sure.
It is.
Right. But it raises a big question.
What's that?
Can we reduce the entirety of their spiritual experiences to brain dysfunction?
That's a good question.
Or are we missing something crucial if we try to explain them solely through a medical lens?
It's a huge question.
It challenges us to think about the nature of reality itself
Right.
and how much our brains shape our perception of it.
Exactly.
So if someone has a profound spiritual experience
Yeah.
that aligns with the criteria for a mental disorder,
Uh-huh.
does that negate the experience itself?
It forces us to consider our own biases.
Right.
Are we too quick to pathologize experiences that we don't understand
Sure.
or that fall outside our current scientific paradigms?
Right. What are some things we should consider when trying to navigate this tricky terrain?
Well, one key point is that most mental disorders are chronic,
Okay.
whereas mystical experiences are often isolated events.
Right.
It's hard to explain a one-time life-altering experience
Yeah.
solely through the lens of a chronic condition.
Right. And seizures tend to be very stereotyped,
Yes.
whereas mystical experiences are often incredibly diverse and unique. Yeah.
Exactly. There's a huge variety in how people describe and experience these states.
Sure.
The descriptions people gave in your survey were so vivid and powerful.
Yeah.
Feeling a sense of unity with the universe, experiencing unconditional love,
Right.
even sensing a divine presence communicating through them.
It's hard to imagine those experiences being reduced to a simple neurological glitch.
It suggests a depth and complexity
Yeah.
that goes beyond a straightforward neurological explanation.
So it seems like there's more to the story
Yeah.
than just brain activity.
It raises a crucial question.
Okay.
Even if we can find neurological correlates for these experiences,
Yeah.
does that mean they're any less real or meaningful for the individual?
Right. It's like saying that because we understand how music affects the brain,
Uh-huh.
the emotional power of music is somehow diminished.
Exactly. The subjective experience is still real,
Right.
even if we can trace its roots in the brain.
Okay, so this reminds me of Jill Bolt Taylor,
Okay.
the neuroscientist who had a stroke, and described profound mystical insights during the experience.
Fascinating story.
Could it be that dysfunction in some cases
Uh-huh.
can actually unlock hidden pathways in the brain,
Okay.
leading to these extraordinary states of consciousness?
That's a fascinating question.
It is.
It challenges us to rethink our assumptions about the relationship between the brain and consciousness.
Right.
Perhaps what we consider normal brain function
Yeah.
is actually limiting our access to certain states of awareness.
This entire conversation has been such a journey.
It has.
We've gone from basic brain anatomy to the frontiers of consciousness. And I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
We have. And now we're going to dive even deeper into the nature of mystical experiences themselves.
Okay.
And what they can teach us about the human brain and the mysteries of consciousness.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's get mystical. All right, so we're about to get mystical, but where do we even begin?
Right.
How do you define something that's often described as, like, ineffable beyond words?
Yeah. It seems like a scientific paradox.
It is a challenge. You're right. The term mystical experience can feel very slippery.
Yeah.
But despite the difficulty of putting these experiences into language,
right,
there are common threads that run through descriptions across different cultures and time periods.
Okay, so like what? Give me some of those universal mystical vibes.
Well, you often hear about a sense of unity or oneness, a feeling of transcending the boundaries of the self, a deep connection to something larger than oneself, and experiences of the sacred or divine.
Right.
These themes pop up again and again, even if the details and interpretations vary wildly.
And those themes definitely came through in the survey responses you shared.
Yes.
So many people describe that feeling of oneness, of interconnectedness, like they were tapping into a hidden dimension of reality.
Exactly. And what's really exciting is that we're beginning to see how these subjective experiences might be reflected in the brain.
How those feelings of unity and transcendence might actually have a neurological basis.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. Give me the neuroscience of the mystical brain.
Well, one area that keeps popping up is the parietal lobe.
Okay, the parietal.
Specifically the superior parietal lobe.
All right.
This area is involved in our sense of self, our body image, and our spatial awareness.
Right.
Basically how we distinguish ourselves from the world around us.
We talked earlier about how this area shows decreased activity during meditation and prayer.
We did.
Could this explain that feeling of losing yourself?
It's possible.
Of merging with something bigger that so many mystics describe?
It's a strong possibility. It suggests that these practices, and perhaps mystical experiences in general, might be temporarily quieting this area, leading to a blurring of the boundaries between self and other.
So interesting.
There's actually a fascinating condition called autoscopic hallucination, where people have out-of-body experiences.
What?
Literally seeing a double of themselves.
Like they're seeing their own ghost.
In a way, yes. And these experiences are often accompanied by feelings of detachment and unreality. Very similar to what people describe in mystical states.
That's wild. Okay, so could it be that mystical experiences are tapping into the same brain circuits?
It's possible.
That are involved in these more unusual phenomena?
That's a fascinating theory.
Yeah.
It opens up a whole new avenue of research.
Right.
It suggests that what we consider normal reality is just one way of experiencing the world. And that our brains have the potential to access other modes of perception, other ways of being that we're only just beginning to explore.
That's pretty mind-blowing. Okay, so the parietal lobe seems to be a key player.
Yeah.
But what about other brain regions?
Well, the temporal lobe is also involved.
Okay, the temporal lobe.
It's involved in memory, language, and emotional processing.
Okay.
And there's evidence that stimulation of certain parts of the temporal lobe can trigger feelings of religious awe and a sense of the presence of a higher power.
There was that famous experiment, right, where they stimulated a patient's temporal lobe.
Right.
And she reported feeling like she was in the presence of God.
Exactly. It suggests that this area of the brain might be involved in generating those intensely emotional and spiritual experiences, those feelings of connection to something transcendent.
Okay, so we've got the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe.
Yeah.
But what about the God spot?
Ah, the God spot.
Is there really a specific area in the brain responsible for religious belief?
It's a catchy term, but the reality is much more complex.
Okay.
There's no single area that acts as a switch for belief.
Right.
Instead, it's more likely a network of different brain regions working together.
Okay.
Each contributing to the overall experience of spirituality.
It's like an orchestra with all these different instruments playing in harmony.
That's a beautiful analogy.
To create this complex symphony of spiritual experience.
And the specific regions involved might vary depending on the type of spiritual experience. So meditation might activate different circuits than prayer, for example.
Right.
Or a mystical experience might involve a unique combination of brain regions firing together.
This all raises a huge question that's been debated for centuries.
Yeah.
Are mystical experiences purely subjective?
Right.
Happening only in the mind? Or are they somehow connecting us to something objective, something outside ourselves?
Right. Can science even answer that question?
I don't know, can
That's
it?
the ultimate mystery, isn't it?
Yeah.
And honestly, science can only take us so far in answering it.
Okay.
We can measure brain activity. We can pinpoint the areas involved.
Right.
But we can't definitively prove or disprove the existence of something transcendent.
Okay.
Something beyond the reach of our scientific instruments.
It's like trying to study love in a lab.
Exactly.
You might be able to measure some of its physiological effects.
Right.
But you can't capture the essence of what love is.
And mystical experiences, by their very nature, point beyond the material world. Beyond the realm of what we can measure and quantify.
Yeah.
They suggest that there might be more to reality than meets the eye. More to consciousness than we currently understand.
So where does that leave us? What can we conclude from all this research on the spiritual brain?
I think the most important takeaway is that our understanding of spirituality is deeply intertwined with our physical brains.
Okay.
The experiences, the beliefs, the rituals.
Yeah.
They all have a biological basis.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they're any less real or meaningful.
It's like saying that because we know how the brain processes music itself is somehow less powerful or moving.
Exactly. The experience is still real, regardless of how we explain it.
This deep dive has been incredible.
It has been.
We've gone from basic brain anatomy to the very frontiers of consciousness.
We have.
What stands out to you as the most surprising or thought-provoking discovery from all this research?
For me, it's the realization that our brains are incredibly dynamic and malleable.
Okay.
We're constantly changing and adapting based on our experiences.
Right.
And those changes can profoundly impact our spiritual lives.
Right.
Just as our beliefs can shape our brains.
Mm.
Our brains can also shape our beliefs.
It's a two-way street.
Yes.
It makes me wonder what happens as our brains inevitably age.
Yeah.
Does our understanding of spirituality change as our brains change?
It's a fascinating question.
Is there a spiritual dimension to aging that we're only beginning to understand?
Those are fantastic questions.
Yeah.
They highlight how much more there is to explore in this fascinating field.
Absolutely.
This deep dive is really just the beginning of a much larger conversation.
You've given us so much to think about.
It's been a pleasure.
And I have a feeling this is just the tip of the iceberg.
I think so too.
But remember, listeners, the exploration doesn't end here.
Keep going.
You've got a wealth of resources to delve into, and now you have a whole new perspective to bring to those materials.
Yes.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the mysteries of the spiritual brain.